times have you looked at the prescription bottle in your medicine cabinet and wondered, can I even take this? When did I buy this? Well, in compounding, it's very, very important that you're dispensing something that indeed is still good. Now, by still good, I might mean still effective, but I also could mean potentially hazardous to you or whoever is taking the medication. In compounding, it's very, very important that you make certain that we follow the guidelines and procedures to make sure that the patient is not taking a product that has gone bad or has gone beyond the intended use. Some things may need to be refrigerated, some things may only be good for a certain amount of days. And in this lecture, we're going to discuss that and learn a few guidelines to help us with that. So we'll start out as what's defined as stability. Well, the stability is the extent to which dosage form retains, within specified limits and throughout its periods of storage and use, the same properties and characteristics that it possessed at the time of its preparation. Now, knowledge or just references that you have, books, CD, internet, whatever the case may be, those are all needed to determine how some chemicals will degrade after time. The pharmacist will know these things, or the computer program that you're using, something around will know these things, and that's what will be used for the beyond use dating. To determine beyond use dating, there's a lot of factors to consider. First of all, let me just say we want to be very conservative with these figures. If there are some studies that show something could be good for up to 180 days, I may still want to put on the label that it's only good for 30 days or so. Why? I just don't want to leave any chance. So you want to be conservative with your beyond use dating. Secondly, are we using any preservatives? Now, a preservative does exactly what it says in the word. It preserves the medication. So something that maybe is only good for a few days without preservative may be good for many days, many weeks with a preservative. Many of the medications that you take over the counter have preservatives in them because they need to stand on the shelf for a long period of time. How about storage considerations? Are we keeping this under refrigeration? Does it need refrigeration at all, or does it even degrade in the refrigerator? For example, insulin is always kept in the refrigerator, and that's because it is maintained at that certain temperature. And then last is dosage forms. Creams or capsules or injections all may have different properties for what makes them have a certain beyond use date. So when you use manufactured products in a compounded prescription, you will have a manufacturer's expiration date to use on the manufacturer's bottle. However, in an effort to be conservative, we want to use just a fraction of that. That fraction is 1/4. If, for example, I have 16 months remaining in a prescription, let's say 16 months from now, the bottle says that these tablets will no longer be stable. What I'll do is I'll just take 1/4 of that. Just 4 months from now, that will be my beyond use date. Or 6 months, whichever is less. Okay, so a 6 months or even less. So in this case, 6 months or 4 months, we would use 4 months in this example right here. Or if I have a raw chemical for it from a supplier, in other words, I have a supplier that's giving me the powders. I don't have to crush up tablets. I don't have to do anything like that. It's giving me the raw powders. It's going to be 6 months that dry preparation is good for. And that's just a good rule of thumb you could use if for some reason that dry product does not have an expiration date. Also, let's discuss stability testing. It's useful to determine in beyond use dating. Maybe you'll send off the medication you have to the lab after 90, 180 days and seeing, is it still the medication that it was on day 1 when it was first dispensed? If it's not, then we need to look into the potency of it. Now, luckily, in today's internet age, you can find out if somebody else has done a stability study on it, and you can use that data, and that would be safe as long as it's from a reputable source. There's more on this in the documentation lecture that might be able to show you a little bit more. It's a little bit more wordy, but it discusses all the points we're talking about here. Lastly, I want to discuss signs of instability. Now, as I think about this, I think about a time whenever I had grabbed some milk from my fridge. I was in college, and to be honest, I just don't pay much attention to the expiration date. In this case, maybe the beyond use date. Let me just say it was well past the beyond use date. It was kind of protruding from the sides of the plastic milk jug. A lot of gas had been formed in it. I opened it up and goodness gracious, it stank. Okay, it was horrible. So obviously that was a good sign of instability there. It had produced some gas, it had an odor. Had I dumped it out, which I may have, but it was quite traumatic. It's tough to remember, but I'm sure it would have been clumpy in there. So there's a few signs of just some kitchen uses for whenever you can see some signs of instability. On into what we see for compounding, solutions, syrups, elixirs, any of these liquids, you might see some precipitation. You might see something right on the top of that medication that's kind of gross looking. You also may see gas formation, whether that be bubbles that you're kind of seeing almost like a Coke drink, or maybe just what I was talking about where it's kind of protruding from the sides. And I was a little concerned with my milk jug because I was worried it might be so under pressure that it might actually explode, which, gosh, that would be really gross. Ointments. We've all seen ointments. Think of Vaseline. That's a good ointment to mention. There might be a change in consistency. You might see a bleeding off of some of the liquid that you're getting. So maybe there's a big puddle of liquid separating from the ointment itself. So you'll see excess separation of that liquid. And also creams. You might see crystal growth. Maybe you've seen that in some of your own home medications or creams, or maybe you'll open up a jar of it and you can see around the rim of it that it's not a cream anymore. It's kind of crystallized right there, and that's a sign of instability. That crystal is obviously not as effective or can't absorb quite as well as the cream can. And then the shrinking down, the water can just come out of that cream, and if you let it just sit there for years and years, eventually it'll just become kind of a crusty mess without any kind of liquid. So that's just a real quick rundown of some signs of instability. We also talked about some rules of thumb for beyond use dating and just why you really need to pay attention to beyond use dating. There's certainly some compounding pharmacies that have gotten in trouble for putting out product that wasn't stable, that had grown some kind of fungus or some kind of bacteria. You want to do everything you can do to make sure that the patient that takes the product that you compounded in your pharmacy, that they take it with good, clean conscience, knowing that your pharmacy makes it very clean, they have good expiration dating, and that whenever it is expired, you won't be dispensing anymore. And the patient needs to know that as well. They need to know, hey, I've had this medication for a month now. Is it still good? And hopefully you've put that on there, or you've made good enough documentation that if they call on the phone and ask you it's still good, you'll be able to have a good answer for that.